Awaken your shadow. The truth sets some people free. It offends everyone else. By Seth, the Red Neo, Cherapak.
Chapter 9. Your Divine Right to Influence. Human speech is like a cracked kettle on which we tap crude rhythms for bears to dance to, while we long to make music that will melt the stars. Gustave Flaubert, Madame Bovary. What you are speaks so loudly that I cannot hear what you say. Ralph Waldo Emerson. Any man who must say, I am the king, is no true king. David Benioff and D.B. Weiss, Game of Thrones, spoken by Tywin Lannister. When a man lies, he murders some part of the world. John Borman and Rospo Pallenberg, Excalibur, spoken by Merlin. Part 1. Foundations of the Charismatic Self.
Your charismatic self is the external voice of your inner essence. It is the divine transmitter through which belief becomes energy, energy becomes presence, and your presence becomes speech that influences and transforms. It doesn't persuade by language alone. It resonates, reveals, and inspires through energy and presence. It turns your inner truth into tangible language that influences through your words, your tone, your posture, your presence, and even your silence. When your charismatic self is awake, people feel the coherence of your whole person, and this coherence awakens an energy in them that they can't help but respond to. Charisma is not performance. It's not volume, charm, theatrics, or even persuasive speech and presence. It's a quiet power that radiates outward when your first 5 selves are awake, congruent, and aligned. When this happens, your nervous system, your emotions, and your intentions vibrate in unison, and the world responds. Your very presence becomes a language that transcends words. This is how the greatest teachers, healers, and leaders move people with the same words that, if spoken by the average person, would land with little or no impact. These teachers speak not from knowledge, but from the integrity of their experience and their connection to the divine wisdom that created all things. Their integrity is a transmission that penetrates and resonates in the hearts and minds of all who hear their voice. This cannot be achieved through learning persuasive communication skills, and that includes nonverbal communication. Before authenticity can flow through your words or presence, it must exist as integrity within you. This is a hard but liberating truth to face. It demands that your divine lover, the bridge between your inner and outer worlds, must already be active, translating what you feel into what you express. Without this sacred bridge, authenticity collapses into imitation, and charisma decays into performance. Authenticity is not the absence of deceit, nor is it moral perfection. Even a deceitful person is capable of being open and aligned with their intentions to harm or mislead others. Such people are less dangerous than the person who harms others out of a misalignment with or alienation from their true selves. True authenticity is the alignment of intention, word, and action. Whether those actions are good or harmful is another matter that we'll discuss later. True authenticity quickens your love, empathy, and conviction to take form and become real. Without this integrity, your voice will always echo someone else's truth. Your charismatic self builds upon this foundation by carrying the integrity of the compassionate self into communication. It is the natural flowering of authenticity, the outward resonance of inner coherence, and herein lies the paradox. Authenticity vibrates higher than love. Love in its purest form reaches outward, but authenticity fuses love with truth, grounding it in reality. Love without authenticity becomes sentimentality. Authenticity without love becomes cold precision. But together they form the divine polarity of compassion and truth. When this polarity is reconciled, communication becomes creation, and even your silence becomes compelling. People who strive to imitate this may manage to fool some people some of the time, but anyone who is awake and discerning will see through their facade. As the Chinese mystic Lao Tzu wrote, "Those who know do not speak, those who speak do not know." Tao Te Ching 56. This proverb reminds us that charisma does not arise from effort or eloquence. True knowing radiates silently, and words spoken from that stillness carry the fragrance of wisdom. The charismatic self doesn't speak to be heard. It allows truth to emerge naturally from its presence. This truth is the external expression of the voice of the divine speaking through us. I am the self seated in the heart of all beings. Bhagavad Gita 10:20. Here Krishna reminds us that authentic communication begins not from personality, but from the indwelling self. When your words rise from that sacred center, they carry universality. Others feel not just you, they feel themselves within your presence. To imitate this voice is to invite the death of your authentic self and the poisoning of the hearts and minds of the people whom you do manage to fool. As we read in both the Old Testament book of Proverbs, life and death are in the power of the tongue. Proverbs 18:21. This proverb testifies to the true power of speech, which is so often neglected in our over-communicated world. The saying, "Sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me," is one of the most irresponsible cliches in the history of spoken language. Words have started wars and ended them. Words have established nations and broken them. Words have ended countless friendships, marriages, and family bonds, and also mended and strengthened them. These realities remind us that while the pen is mightier than the sword, the tongue is nuclear. We find the same insight echoed in the New Testament book of James 3:2-8. "Behold, we put bits in the horses' mouths, that they may obey us, and we turn about their whole body. Behold also the ships, which though they be so great and are driven of fierce winds, yet are they turned about with a very small helm, whithersoever the governor listeth. Even so the tongue is a little member, and boasteth great things. Behold, how great a matter a little fire kindleth. And the tongue is a fire, a world of iniquity. So is the tongue among our members, that it defileth the whole body, and setteth on fire the course of nature. And it is set on fire of hell. For every kind of beasts, and of birds, and of serpents, and of things in the sea is tamed, and hath been tamed of mankind. But the tongue can no man tame. It is an unruly evil, full of deadly poison." Once again we see a deep respect and recognition for the power of the tongue. You'll find the same sentiment in the Eightfold Path of the Buddhist religion, where right speech is heralded as an essential ingredient in the recipe for enlightenment. The person who claims to be spiritual or godly while lacking control of their tongue is neither spiritual, godly, nor wise. They are a ship on uncharted and tumultuous seas where the captain's hands are on the steering wheel, but the ship's rudder is in the hands of a devil. Still, the most important thing to understand is that the tongue is a mere instrument of the heart. As Jesus says in the Gospel of Matthew, "Out of the abundance of the heart the mouth speaks." Matthew 12:34. These verses reveal the moral weight of speech and the role of the heart in directing the tongue. This is why I teach that the heart, the seat of the compassion itself, is the axis for transfiguring the energy of the first three selves into the charismatic, intuitive, and transcendent selves. When the energy of the lower three selves is in shadow, The heart can become polluted, and the other higher selves along with it. Transfiguring this energy starts with a rigorous commitment to shadow work in the first four selves. Only then can we fully understand that every word is a creative or destructive act, shaping life or death, unity or division. The charismatic self understands that speech is sacred, that it reveals the state of the heart long before it informs the mind. This is the fundamental reality from which all things in the universe emerged. As we read in the Gospel of John, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God." John 1:1. This verse describes the beginning not as a single point in time, but as an eternal point of origin. The Word, translated from the Greek logos, is not a sound or speech, but a conscious will vibrating into patterns that manifest as material structures: stars, planets, trees, rocks, water, air, animals, and even human beings. The Hermetic principle of mentalism states that all is mind, meaning that everything we call reality is a projection of consciousness. The Logos is the organization of pure awareness, giving rise to the thoughts that form the structures of the material world. To speak, then, is to echo this primal act of creation. When your consciousness is coherent, your words carry the same structuring power as the Logos. They don't merely describe reality, they participate in its unfolding. When you speak from alignment, you are transmitting order into the field of consciousness around you. Your speech becomes a harmonic of the divine mind, the echo of that first creative impulse that said, "Let there be light." In this way, your voice becomes a bridge between the unseen and the seen, the silent and the spoken, the same bridge that the Buddha spoke of when he said, "Better than 1,000 hollow words is one word that brings peace." Dhammapada 100. Here, the Buddha reminds us that power lies not in quantity, but in resonance. One word uttered from presence outweighs 1,000 spoken from noise. Charisma condenses meaning. It doesn't multiply words, it magnifies truth, and darkness vanishes just as it would in a room suddenly full of light. As we read the yogic texts, the word expressive of Ishvara is Om. Its repetition and contemplation lead to the removal of obstacles. Yoga Sutras 127 to 128. Here, Patanjali shows us that true expression begins with inner stillness. When your mind becomes a calm lake, sound takes form without distortion. The vibration of Om is the same pulse that animates charisma. It clears interference so the divine can speak through you. Interestingly, when you sing the entire range of tones audible to the human ear, you hear Om Yahewa He Om Yahewa He Om. This is the same word the ancients used to describe the God who created the heavens and the earth using only words. Om is simply the sliver of sound that connects lower frequencies to the higher. The closer you get to fully embodying this bridge between worlds, the more you realize that every form of sensation and communication is a mere expression of the universal infinite living mind that the Greeks called the Logos. We find references to this concept in every ancient spiritual text. That which makes the tongue to speak but needs no tongue to speak, that alone is God, not what people here adore. Kena Upanishad 1.5. The Upanishadic seer points us to the source behind all expression. It is not the ear that hears or the mouth that speaks, but that which empowers both. The charismatic self draws from this wellspring of consciousness, where sound and silence are one. Each of these teachings breathes life into a single revelation. Charisma is not learned, it is remembered. It is the soul's natural resonance when all distortions fall away. Authenticity, in its highest vibration, transcends love but also fulfills it. It makes love real in form, in tone, in gesture. It transforms compassion from an intention into an experience. When you speak or act from that state, your words become living frequencies that carry not only meaning but power. Charisma is the energy that selects and colors your words with an energy that quickens them. The same words spoken with or without it are experienced differently, just as the same words, colored by a lack of energetic integrity, can wound or wither. The vibration behind your words determines whether they heal or harm, inspire or drain, liberate or manipulate. Neuroscience now supports what mystics have always known. Studies on emotional contagion, Hatfield, Cacioppo, and Rapson, Emotional Contagion 1994, show that humans unconsciously mirror the facial expressions, tone, and posture of others. Mirror neurons, first described by Rizzolatti and colleagues in the mid-1990s, fire both when we act and when we observe someone else act. Presence itself is contagious. When you enter a room coherent, grounded, and attuned, other nervous systems calibrate to your state. You are not merely inspiring, you are entraining. This is the biological reflection of what the ancients called the laying on of hands. Here we meet the Hermetic principle of polarity, which states that everything is dual. Opposites are identical in nature, but different in degree. Your charismatic self is the living demonstration of the principle of polarity. Light and shadow, attraction and aversion, truth and imitation, all are degrees of the same force. When you reject your own authenticity, you swing to the opposite pole, performance. When you integrate it, polarity becomes power. The same energy that once distorted into imitation becomes radiance. This is why Carl Jung, the greatest modern thinker on the concept of shadow work, said, "He who rejects nothing commands everything." To embrace a higher vibration is to, by detail, polarize yourself against the corresponding lower vibration. But you are not rejecting these things. You're simply embracing a vibration that forces rejection from them. Activating and expressing your authentic self will trigger envy, rejection, and even distorted accusations from anyone on the polar end of the same spectrum. I experienced this while writing this book, including a permanently ruptured relationship that came literally as I committed myself to a daily declaration which you'll find at the end of these chapters on the 7 selves. The final break came literally the day before I wrote these words you're reading now. Be ready for this. It will hurt at first, especially when it comes from people who were once aligned with you. It will create an unbearable grief that you'll literally feel in your body. Do not fight or repress this energy. That will only feed your shadow selves and attract the spiritual predators warned about in this book. Embrace it as a necessary spiritual pruning. Give the grief to God and allow His grace to transfigure it into its higher form of expression. The divine messenger, your higher expression of the charismatic self, does not emerge from suppressing polarity. It emerges from reconciling and integrating it. This turns imitation into inspiration, performance into presence, and self-rejection into self-revelation. As you do this, you'll discover the truth spoken of by Lao Tzu. Under heaven all can see beauty as beauty only because there is ugliness. Being and non-being produce each other. Tao Te Ching 2. The Egyptians named this balance Ma'at. The Taoists spoke of yin and yang. The Hermeticists codified polarity into a divine principle. The book of Genesis spoke of God dividing light from darkness and above from below. All these describe the same truth, the reconciliation of opposites births creative power. The charismatic self is that reconciliation in motion, the point at which silence becomes sound, love becomes truth, and energy becomes word. When your words, emotions, and body are aligned with your inner truth, polarity becomes balanced. Your presence becomes electric, not chaotic, magnetic, not performative. When fragmented, even eloquence falls flat. But when balanced through authenticity, Your words carry the vibration of creation itself. To awaken your charismatic self is to reclaim your voice as a spiritual instrument, not to persuade, but to tune reality itself. To stand in a room and let your energy say what your words cannot. To see the divine pattern in others so clearly that they begin to remember it themselves. When this self is alive, you don't perform truth, you embody it, and in your presence, others begin to do the same. This is the living gospel of influence, the embodiment of belief that heals, inspires, and awakens. The charismatic self is not the preacher, but the pulse, not the actor, but the amplifier. It is your invitation to remember that words create worlds, and the sound of your coherence is the sound of creation itself. New subheader: the charismatic self in relationships. In relationships, the charismatic self turns energy into communication, and communication becomes creation. It is the pulse that animates words, gestures, and silence with resonance, the invisible current that passes between souls. Just as the secure self provides safety, the adventurous self brings vitality, the sovereign self maintains integrity, and the compassionate self sustains connection. The charismatic self gives the relationship its rhythm and radiance. It transforms conversation into communion and chemistry into coherence. Every relationship you enter is a living, energetic ecosystem, what we earlier called the third entity. It is not merely the sum of two people, but a living field, a consciousness with its own needs, purpose, and seasons of growth. The charismatic self tends this third entity through the subtle art of energetic communication. You are always transmitting who you are, not only through words, but through micro-expressions, tone, breath, rhythm, and stillness. These are the frequencies that speak before language. When your charismatic self is awake, your energy becomes ordered, resonant, and receptive. You become transparent enough for truth to flow through you, yet grounded enough for that truth to take form in word and gesture. Charisma, then, is not performance. It is a dance of mutual consent to build intimacy. It is how coherence moves unhindered between two people. I learned this truth the hard way while writing this book when the most important relationship of my life ruptured. Two nervous systems, both yearning to be met but transmitting opposite frequencies. Hers seeking safety and presence, mine seeking restoration and repair. Her wound of betrayal met my wound of wrongful accusation, and the result was a pattern as combustible as gasoline and fire. The more I tried to restore what was lost, the more she felt unsafe. The more she sought reassurance, the more I felt falsely condemned. Each of us in our own way was trying to survive, and in doing so, we were both unconsciously protecting ourselves from the third entity we had vowed to nurture. Our efforts to defend the self slowly starved the relationship of breath. This is what happens when two people operate from survival contracts. The relationship becomes a battlefield of unmet needs rather than a sanctuary for shared evolution. This self understands the sacred contract of language. Language is a bridge between minds, but it's also a living covenant of energy. It governs how tone becomes trust, how words become worlds, how vibration creates perception and meaning. When this contract is violated by fear, deception, or self-rejection, communication becomes manipulation, a strategy for survival rather than revelation. When it is honored through authenticity and attunement, it becomes the highest form of worship. The charismatic self knows that every word spoken with integrity is a prayer uttered in the temple of relationship. In the third entity, words are not separate from energy. Your partner, friend, or child does not only hear what you say, they feel what you mean. Your nervous system and theirs synchronize through the principle of polarity, which governs all energetic exchange. Every moment of communication is a balancing of opposites, speaking and listening, revealing and receiving, giving and allowing. The charismatic self harmonizes these polarities. It speaks without dominating and listens without disappearing. It lets the masculine current of expression and the feminine current of receptivity dance as one coherent field. When both are present, communication becomes creation, the living fusion of sound and silence, light and shadow, self and other. The shadow of the charismatic self is imitation born of self-rejection. It is charisma without coherence, presence without integrity. This happens when the wound of rejection drives the urge to perform. The voice becomes a mask, empathy becomes mimicry, and charm becomes camouflage. This false charisma may impress, but it cannot inspire. It attracts attention, but repels trust. It is the counterfeit of divine influence, the projection of borrowed light instead of the radiation of one's own. When polarity is unconscious, relationships oscillate between extremes, dominance and submission, talking and withdrawing, performing and suppressing. When polarity is integrated, it becomes a living current of creative tension. The charismatic self embraces this tension as sacred. It is the electricity that keeps the third entity alive. Just as lightning brings life-giving nitrogen to the soil, polarity brings renewal to the relational field. It reminds both people that contrast is not conflict. It is creation in disguise. To live through your charismatic self is to speak from your center rather than your defenses. It means letting energy precede language, attuning before answering, breathing before reacting, aligning intention with truth before speaking. You begin to feel that your words are instruments of resonance, not weapons or shields. When spoken from alignment, even simple phrases land with impact. You might say, "I understand. That hurt. I'm here with you." When these words are colored with authenticity, their impact lands in the listener's mind, body, and soul. When you speak with authenticity, you're nurturing the sacred third entity, for which you are both responsible, just as parents are responsible for caring for their child. The charismatic self listens for the meaning behind words. It understands that meanings lie not in the words themselves, but in the person speaking them. It hears the spaces between sentences, the heartbeat beneath the story, the emotion hiding inside the silence, and the hurt behind hurtful words. It senses when a word is premature or when the person's presence defies their spoken words. This is your charismatic self's deep awareness that in every true conversation, something larger than either of you is speaking through both of you, seeking union, harmony, and creation. As Ralph Waldo Emerson wrote in his essay, The Oversoul, "The action of the soul is oftener in that which is felt and left unsaid than in that which is said in any conversation. It broods over every society, and they unconsciously seek for it in each other. We know better than we do. We do not yet possess ourselves, and we know at the same time that we are much more. I feel the same truth how often in my trivial conversation with my neighbors that somewhat higher in each of us overlooks this byplay, and Jove nods to Jove from behind each of us." Here, Emerson reminds us that the true voice in relationship is not the ego striving to be heard. It is the voice of the Oversoul, which is also called Yahweh in the Old Testament, the Logos in the New Testament, Gospel of John, the All in the Hermetic tradition, the Tao in Taoism, Brahma in the Vedic scriptures, and what the quantum physicist Max Planck called the matrix of creation. These are all words for the universal infinite living mind that we know as God. It speaks through the union of two selves. When the charismatic self listens from this awareness, every conversation becomes a window into the divine mind itself. Later in his essay, Emerson writes, "In my dealing with my child, my Latin and Greek, my accomplishments and my money stead me nothing, but as much soul as I have avails. If I am willful, he sets his will against mine, one for one, and leaves me, if I please, the degradation of beating him by my superiority of strength. But if I renounce my will and act for the soul, setting that up as umpire between us two, out of his young eyes looks the same soul. He reveres and loves with me. Here is a beautifully humble admission of a father's feelings of humility, as he realizes that the same divine mind that lives and speaks through him is also speaking through his child. When Emerson speaks of renouncing his will, he is not speaking of submission to his son, but to the divine mind speaking through his son. When we abandon the egotistical impulse of self-preservation and turn our attention toward the needs of the relationship, we are submitting ourselves not to the other person's will, but to the will of God. This is charisma in its highest form. It's not about the superficial energy of attraction. It is about divine reverence. It reveals both partners to themselves. It illuminates what has been hidden, not to shame or expose, but to heal. It turns misunderstanding into understanding, distance into intimacy, and pretense into presence. When the charismatic self governs the relationship, communication ceases to be transactional. It becomes transformational. The third entity, the living soul of the relationship, thrives in that resonance, continually evolving into higher coherence. In this way, the charismatic self fulfills the principle of polarity by integrating opposites into harmony. It balances speech and silence, assertion and surrender, clarity and compassion. It embodies the active and receptive forces of the principle of gender in perfect proportion, the divine marriage of expression and listening. When these currents unite, the third entity vibrates with divine intelligence. The relationship itself begins to speak, move, and evolve as one living organism. This is charisma at its highest expression, a divine resonance that sanctifies influence, purifies love, and breathes creation into every word and every silence. New subheader: the charismatic self and the contract of language. Language is our highest and most fragile responsibility as human beings. It can nurture or preserve. It can also destabilize and destroy. When we incarnate into a flesh and blood body, we agree to wield this power, whether we are consciously aware of it or not. To become conscious is to accept that every word we speak and interpret is an act of authorship. This is the fifth of the 7 contracts of incarnation, which says, I will communicate with other conscious beings. Words are energetic signatures that ripple through the full field of consciousness, influencing speaker and hearer alike. Their influence can outlive the person who spoke or wrote them, and the stories collected and passed down throughout eons of human history prove this. In this respect, words have the same effect of what we commonly call magic or spellcraft. Words are expressions of will that have a deep, widespread, and time-transcending effect on the external world and the internal world of others. This is why the fifth of the 7 contracts of incarnation is the contract of language. This is our sacred agreement to respect language as a tool for life or death, and this includes how we speak to others, but also how we listen. This sacred covenant has 2 complementary clauses. I will speak only words that create and protect. This is the outward masculine clause of this covenant. It mirrors the Buddhist concept of right speech, which goes deeper than the commitment to honest and authentic speech. The inward and feminine clause is the commitment to listen with empathy. I will listen to understand, not to interpret. This clause encodes the listening posture that completes the creative act of communication. The person who masters the first clause while neglecting the second uses speech as a weapon to dominate and manipulate others, even when they intend not to. Both are sacred and symbiotic covenants. The charismatic self carries this responsibility as both gift and burden because language, like fire, can illuminate or desecrate depending on the steadiness and integrity of the hand that wields it. Modern research in psychology and neuroscience confirms that words don't just describe our experience, they help create it. In one experiment at Yale University, participants who held a warm cup of coffee judged a stranger as friendlier and more generous than those holding an iced cup. Williams and Barg, 2008. Another study found that people carrying a heavy clipboard rated issues as more serious and important than those with lighter clipboards. Jossman, Lakins, and Schubert, 2009. These effects mirror the metaphors we use every day. We speak of warm people and weighty matters, and our bodies quietly act out those meanings. Even the way we imagine time changes with our words. Research by cognitive scientist Lara Boroditsky showed that English speakers who see the future as ahead tend to lean forward when thinking about it, while Mandarin speakers who imagine time vertically gesture upward instead. Boroditsky, 2000. These studies reveal that metaphor is not a figure of speech, it's a structure of consciousness. The language we use imprints directly into perception, emotion, and even posture. Every word we speak carries a vibration that teaches the body what reality feels like. This is the impact of our words, both on us and on the people seeing, hearing, or reading them. The same is true for how we allow other people's words to influence us, and that is determined more by our interpretation of their words than by the words themselves. This is why I say that language is our highest and most fragile responsibility as human beings. New subheader, clause number 1, right speech. In most spiritual traditions, speech is treated as sacred power. The Hebrew Bible begins with creation through speech, and God said, "Let there be light." In Hindu philosophy, the world arises from sound, the nada, the primal vibration. In the Memphite theology inscribed on the Shabaka stone, the god Ptah creates the world through the spoken word of the heart. And in the Gospel of John, the Logos, the Word, was not a symbol, but the very structure of divine intention moving into form. Each tradition points to the same law. Speech is the instrument through which the unseen becomes seen. But this same power, when misused, becomes vanity. When the third commandment warns, "Thou shalt not take the name of the Lord thy God in vain," it is not cautioning against profanity, it is cautioning against empty speech. To take the name in vain means to invoke divine authority without alignment, to use sacred language without sacred intention. It is the utterance of words that claim truth but carry no life. When you speak without coherence, when your words flatter what your heart does not honor, you are speaking in vanity. Vain words are not merely lies. They are hollow creations. They drain energy from the field rather than generating it. They mimic presence while masking absence. Every time you gossip, flatter insincerely, exaggerate for attention, or hide truth behind clever phrasing, you fracture your resonance with the divine order. This is not moralism. It is metaphysics. Words without life distort the structure of the field itself, just as dissonant sound waves can shatter glass or throw a bridge off balance. Incoherent speech disturbs the subtle architecture of consciousness in the same way. The principle of polarity reveals the deeper law behind this. Every word carries a charge. It either builds or breaks, blesses or curses, aligns or divides. Speech can sanctify or desecrate, depending on whether it arises from coherence or from fear. This is why the charismatic self does not speak to be heard, but to harmonize. It does not argue to win, but in a genuine attempt to align. The polarity of language is not moral, it is vibrational. Every word has an energetic and acoustic frequency that registers both in the air and in the nervous system. Its effect depends not on morality, but on coherence. This polarity is also what gives power to the word no. In the teachings of Jesus, we hear this sacred simplicity. Let your yes mean yes, and your no mean no. Anything more comes from evil. Matthew 5:37. This is not merely a call for honesty, it is a metaphysical law. A clear yes and a clear no are the twin pillars of creation defining the borders of coherence. Every no you speak in alignment with truth activates the principle of polarity. It clarifies what belongs and what does not. It is the masculine function of defense, of boundary setting, of creating safety and order. To say no with clarity is to stand guard at the gates of the sacred. In this light, no is the most powerful word in any language. It ends what drains life and preserves what gives it. It is the sound of sacred authority, the edge of discernment that protects creation from distortion. When you speak no from love, you are not rejecting life, you are protecting its integrity. And when your yes arises from the same clarity, you invite expansion from a place of grounded truth. Together, yes and no form the magnetic poles of divine authorship, defining the geometry through which language creates worlds, just as Lao Tzu taught in Book 2 of the Tao Te Ching. Under heaven all can see beauty as beauty only because there is ugliness. All can know good as good only because there is evil. Being and non-being produce each other, difficult and easy complete each other, long and short define each other, high and low depend on each other, before and after follow each other. The ancients understood this polarity well. The Sanskrit term Vak referred to the goddess of speech, revered as both creator and destroyer. The Egyptians feared the curse of false utterance. In Buddhism, right speech is one of the 8 limbs of the Noble Path. Speech that is truthful, timely, kind, and necessary. Every tradition warns that vain or careless words corrupt the soul, not because of superstition, but because words are vectors of energy, carrying the emotional and acoustic imprint of our inner state through tone, rhythm, and vibration, directly influencing both body and environment. Your charismatic self honors this contract by speaking only words that create value, words that edify what is aligned, or that set clear boundaries against what is not. This is the spiritual expression of the principle of polarity. You either speak to expand truth or you speak to dissolve distortion. Both are sacred. Saying no with clarity can be just as creative as saying yes with love. When you speak from this alignment, your voice carries the resonance of coherence itself. But when you speak from vanity, you reverse the current. You waste divine energy through words that serve neither truth nor creation. You say, "I'm fine," when you are breaking inside. You compliment to be liked, not to uplift. You promise without intention to deliver. You project certainty to hide fear. Each of these acts fractures your alignment with the divine logos, the creative order itself. To honor the contract of language is to make every word count, to treat language as liturgy, not noise. It is to recognize that speaking is a spiritual act with consequences written in the unseen. The charismatic self speaks intentionally, knowing that sound itself is a form of sacred geometry in motion, as each word creates patterns of vibration that organize energy into form. Just as harmonic resonance shapes matter in cymatic experiments, it listens before responding, it allows silence to ripen meaning, it refuses to speak in vanity, because it knows that every utterance becomes a thread in the web of creation. In practical terms, this means speak what you are prepared to embody. Withhold words that drain energy or distort truth. Let yes mean coherence, and no mean clarity. Bless what you believe in, and release what you do not. The contract of language reminds you that speech is the voice of your creative authority. To speak from alignment is to stand at the threshold between the unseen and the seen, translating divine will into form. When your words match your essence, language becomes light, and through that light you remember who you are, the echo of creation speaking itself anew. This is our we remember and honor our sacred commitment to right speech. New subheader, clause number 2, empathic listening. In the movie Excalibur, the character Merlin said, "When a man lies, he murders a part of the world." I would add that when you misinterpret someone else, you murder a part of them. especially if you use your highly polished speech and persuasion skills to project that misinterpretation into the hearts and minds of others. The same is true if you project a positive but inaccurate interpretation of them, one which they cannot or do not wish to live up to. Both are violations of the sacred commitment to listen to others, not to interpret them, but to understand them. The Excalibur quote is a profound insight into the power of language, made by a character who understood its weight. It is especially important for understanding our commitment to empathic listening. Merlin is an archetype of the sorcerer. In the ancient world, a sorcerer was someone with the ability to enchant through their speech. This definition has been replaced by the Hollywood caricature of the sorcerer as a dark figure shooting lightning bolts from their hands and other magical feats that defy the fundamental laws of physics. They trivialize the sorcerer archetype in a way that makes them a figment of the world of make-believe, when the truth is so contrary to this illusion. Language is the true magic, and words are the spells we cast on ourselves and others by crafting and propping up internal beliefs that may or may not align with the laws of our external reality. Modern sorcerers are the people writing teleprompter scripts parroted by mainstream media and silver-tongued politicians who murder parts of reality by either denying that they exist as they do, or by distorting them with language tricks that replace objective reason with emotional manipulation. We feed this dark, occult energy every time we allow these narratives to shape our beliefs. We feed it every time we react without taking the time to listen, and that's where the second clause of the contract of language takes center stage. Read the comments on YouTube, or the debates on social media sites or underneath news articles online, and you'll see this at work. People reading and reacting only to the headlines and immediately dispatching arguments for or against what was written without knowing what the article or video was about. The Old Testament book of Proverbs warned against this spiritual sickness when it said, "He that answereth a matter before he heareth it, it is folly and shame unto him." Proverbs 18:13. The darkest and most destructive manifestation of this proverb is our impulse to use language to create false representations of others. When we fail or reduce to listen to another human being and to honor their internal motives, perspectives, hopes, and fears, whether we disagree with them or not, and whether we understand them or not, this is a grave violation of the second clause of the contract of language. Empathic listening encodes the listening posture that completes the creative act of communication. The person who masters right speech while neglecting this second clause will wield speech as a weapon to dominate and manipulate others even when they intend not to. Both are sacred and symbiotic covenants. The charismatic self carries this responsibility as both gift and burden because language, like fire, can illuminate or desecrate depending on the steadiness and integrity of the hand that wields it. If to lie is to murder a part of the world, to misrepresent another person in this way is to spiritually murder a part of that person. This reputational violence is often the precursor to physical violence. Jesus calls this pattern out in the Sermon on the Mount when he says, "You have heard that it was said, 'You shall not murder,' but I say to you that everyone who is angry with his brother will be liable to judgment, and whoever says, 'You fool,' will be liable to the hell of fire." Matthew 5:21-22. Such murder begins in the heart, then the mind, as our assumptions or accusations about that person crystallize into words and stories. We reduce a soul to a label, a story, or a slogan, and when we speak these words out loud and others believe us, we have spiritually murdered a part of the person we're misrepresenting. This may sound extreme, but consider just how quickly a false story or label can permanently ruin a person's reputation, livelihood, and sense of belonging in society. The so-called social justice warriors and members of the global woke cult have soaked their hands in blood through the public practice of cancel culture. Modern reputations aren't just destroyed in court and articles published in print publications or aggressive political ads. Today, anyone can bury the knife in another human being in the global market of social media and the court of public opinion. Neuroscience supports this metaphysical warning. Repeated falsehoods and distortions reshape emotional memory and perception in the brain, making lies feel true through mere repetition. Studies show that when words are spoken with emotional conviction, they can override factual accuracy and create a felt sense of truth. In this way, language literally rewires consciousness. What begins as deceit becomes embodied as perception. This is why the Old Testament commandments include warnings against bearing false testimony. The popular interpretation is that this is a commandment against lying. But we find places in the Bible and in history where lies were told to protect the lives of the innocent. Rahab lied to protect 2 foreigners from capture and annihilation. During World War II, households lied to the Gestapo about the whereabouts of fugitives who were staying in their houses to avoid capture and annihilation. Such lies are not sins, but acts of self-defense against the plots of those doing the devil's bidding. In Hebrew law, this commandment specifically forbade false testimony in a court of justice. Perjury intended to harm the innocent or protect the guilty, not every form of deception. The commandment against false testimony spoke of testimonies given in courts of law where people's lives and livelihoods were literally on the line. These are the true acts of wickedness and demonstrations that while the pen might be mightier than the sword, the tongue is more deadly still. This warns us of the second aspect of the contract of language, which commands us to listen for the meanings behind people's words, not to our interpretations of the word or even the meaning of the word as outlined in a dictionary. Yes, it's important to be clear in our communication and to choose our words carefully to make sure that they're an accurate reflection of our internal intention. But when we listen, it's our moral duty to commit ourselves to the second clause of the contract of language, which says, "I will listen to understand, not to interpret." Right speech is our personal duty. It is not a license to impose this standard on others when we listen. To do so is to set yourself as judge, jury, and executioner of their soul. Jesus warned us against this in Matthew 7:1-2, saying, "Do not judge, or you too will be judged. 2, for in the same way you judge others, you will be judged, and with the measure you use, it will be measured to you." This might be the most insightful thing ever spoken about interpersonal relationships. Yet it remains largely unrecognized for its practical value. Religious people misread the line, "In the same way you judge others, you will be judged, and with the measure you use, it will be measured unto you," assuming that Jesus is talking about God's judgment. But the deeper scientific truth is that this is exactly what happens in relationships. When you judge others harshly, your own brain turns those same patterns of judgment against you when you evaluate your own worth and identity. Likewise, people are far more likely to listen to you with empathy if you listen to them in the same way. This is what Jesus means when he says that with the measure you use, it will be measured unto you. Right speech does not give us the right to demand such precision from others, or to impose our own interpretation of words, stories, or inner hopes and fears onto them. Empathic listening starts with accepting that meaning does not live in words, it lives in the person who is speaking them. To assume or to insist that someone else conform to your preferred wording while refusing to honor their inner world is not smart or even moral. The same goes for claims that we're holding them accountable or calling them out. If we have not listened to them and understood what they meant by what they said, we have ceased to be an agent of light and become an agent of the dark, occult energy threatening to destroy peace, freedom, and love in our modern world. The charismatic self practices empathic listening as its moral duty toward others. It does this with the same diligence that it practices right speech for itself. Most importantly, it does not confuse the two by projecting its interpretations onto others or skirting responsibility to temper its own speech when it sees patterns of being persistently misunderstood by others. Empathic listening is the receptive pole of the same divine current that right speech represents. Together, they embody the principle of polarity. One expresses truth outward, the other receives it inward. Empathic listening seeks the internal and personal meanings behind another person's words. It does not judge the other person's words only by their technical definition, that is, dictionary definitions or popular interpretations, or by its own cultural or personal understanding of those words. This is not empathy, but dominance. At best, it blocks us from seeing the humanity of another person, but when it attacks the other person's character, intentions, or reputation, it crosses the line Jesus warned us of when he said that doing so puts us in danger of the fires of hell. This ought to land like a sledgehammer in the heart of anyone who claims Jesus to be their Lord. This warning is not coming from me. It's coming from him, and he will hold you accountable for how you respond. But I say unto you, that every idle word that men shall speak, they shall give account thereof in the day of judgment. Matthew 12:36. For those who don't believe in Jesus, or who simply see him as a human being and a good teacher, I encourage you to consider this from the lens of human behavior and basic decency, or at least from a lens of pure utility to start. When people feel seen, heard, and understood, they open up to you, they trust you, they give you permission to influence them. When they feel unseen, unheard, and misrepresented, they shut down. They become suspicious of your motives. They put up physical, intellectual, and emotional barriers against you, and you lose any opportunity to influence them or even access them. That has a cost, and the price may be much higher and more painful than you can see yet. Empathic listening is not only morally right and good, it's logically wise and beneficial. It's also vital if you have any ambition to influence the world and leave a legacy. As Stephen R. Covey taught, seek first to understand, then to be understood. Do not wait for the other person to do this first. That's not leadership, it's submission to scarcity and to a fear of not being enough. Leading starts with listening. If the person you're listening to refuses to reciprocate and to understand you when it's time to speak, that's on them. If they choose not to be led after you've had the conversation, let them continue on their path and find someone who is willing. Remember that you can always walk away, but if you refuse to lead from the beginning, you have chosen to be led by your own fears. New subheader: Marrying the two clauses. The two clauses of the contract of language must work together. To practice one while neglecting the other is to become snagged on a single pole of polarity, where truth divides instead of unites. When right speech is practiced without empathic listening, language hardens into judgment. It becomes the weapon of the self-righteous, the intellect severed from compassion. But when empathic listening is practiced without right speech, communication collapses into cowardice. It becomes sentimentality masquerading as virtue, where honesty is sacrificed to avoid discomfort. In both cases, the divine current of creation is fractured, and what was meant to bring coherence instead breeds confusion. Together, however, these clauses form a sacred circuit. Right speech channels clarity from spirit into form. Empathic listening opens the heart to receive truth without distortion. One is the exhale of creation, the other the inhale of understanding. Each balances and purifies the other. This is how language becomes communion rather than competition, how meaning circulates freely between souls without distortion, dominance, or deceit. Precision in your own speech is sacred discipline. Policing another's language is domination and the first step toward committing the reputational homicide Jesus warned us about. Jordan Peterson's counsel to speak precisely is a call to personal responsibility, not a license to berate. The charismatic self understands this paradox. Speak cleanly yourself and extend grace while listening to others. To embody both clauses is to practice the masculine and feminine aspects of truth, clarity with compassion, power with peace. When you master this balance, questions like, "What did you mean? What were you trying to say just then? Can you tell me more about that?" Such questions honor the other person and they covenant of conversation and connection. They also honor the fact that meanings lie not in words but in people. History shows us that linguistic dehumanization precedes bodily harm. Just look at the widespread public propaganda during times of war and genocide. History is stained with the blood of people who violated the second clause of the sacred contract of language and persuaded others to do their dark bidding. When cultures normalize label-making and mantra repetition, verbal violence primes social permission for coercion and eventually physical violence. Whether by ostracism, economic punishment, or open force, the sequence is the same. Misrepresent to reduce, to dehumanize, to justify harm. The habit of weaponizing vocabulary, performing moral purity tests, redefining dissent as harm, and collapsing disagreement into accusations enacts this energetic pattern. The charismatic self refuses this economy. It restores conversation to covenant, not combat. This balance between right speech and empathic listening is the principle of polarity in practical action. Those who fail to see or to practice this balance remain snagged in the polarizing obsession with right speech, and that includes people who think themselves intellectually, morally, or spiritually superior because of their command of language. To honor the contract of language is to honor both poles. This promotes dignity, prevents escalation, and keeps the third entity, the relationship, the community, the culture, alive and thriving. When we distort reality through deceitful speech or through one-sided listening, we murder the world, we dismember creation itself. Each false word or interpretation erases a piece of the shared world that might have been built in trust. Every truthful word and honestly heard word, by contrast, restores coherence and breathes life back into what was lost. Neuroscientific research supports this spiritual law. Studies on mirror neurons and empathic listening show that when we truly attend to another's words and emotions, our brain mirrors their state as if we were Experian. Sing it ourselves. In this way, listening literally generates resonance. It restores harmony within and between nervous systems, proving that understanding is not metaphorical connection, but embodied communion. When we honor both the sacred covenant to speak with clarity and purpose, and to listen to understand instead of interpret, we become instruments of life. We embody the truth and grace of the universal infinite living mind that we call God, and become co-creators with the divine. New subheader: the charismatic self and the principle of polarity. The principle of polarity tells us that what we call opposites are not separate forces. They are two contrasting expressions of the same phenomenon. Heat and cold are not opposites. They are simply words we use to distinguish between contrasting degrees of heat. Light and dark are not opposites. They are words we use to distinguish between contrasting degrees of light. Heat and cold and light and dark run along the same spectrum, differing only in degree. There is no crisp line where heat ends and cold begins, nor where light ends and dark begins. Both are one and the same. We only label them opposites based on how we experience them in relation to one another. The same is true for the emotions of security and fear, excitement and boredom, validation and rejection, purpose and futility. We speak of the cosmos expanding and contracting, of oceans rising and falling, of seasons coming and going, and of living things being born and dying. With these labels, we describe our experience of the principles of polarity and rhythm as they set the pace of the divine heartbeat of the universe. This rhythmic movement between opposites manifests and disintegrates everything in creation. Every ending houses the seed of its beginning. The same current that turns winter into spring and light into darkness also turns grief into grace, fear into faith, and cowardice into courage. All these are manifestations of the divine principle of polarity. Polarity is the unifier of contrasts and the reconciler of paradoxes. It is the axis around which all creation spins. To live in harmony with it is to stop resisting the movements between opposites and to move with it. The Taoists call this practice Wu Wei, or non-resistance. To practice it is to see and understand that peace isn't stillness. It is the grounding of consciousness amidst a world forever in motion. To master it is to become the dancer who keeps their balance by flowing with the music instead of fighting it. The principles of rhythm, gender, causation, and correspondence all find their expression, balance, and mastery through the principle of polarity. Rhythm is the fluctuation between polar opposites, the pulse of expansion and contraction, sowing and reaping, breathing in and breathing out. By embracing polarity, we learn to move with this rhythm instead of resisting it. Most people exist in blind binging at times and starving at others. They love and then they loathe. They work and then they burn out. They rest and then fall into boredom. The charismatic self uses polarity to move with rhythm instead of being whipped about by it. It rises above the pendulum and observes or directs it rather than being swung by it. That is why spiritual maturity feels like paradox. You must learn to work while resting, speak while listening, give while receiving. When polarity becomes your teacher, you stop fearing pauses and plateaus. You realize that dormancy is not death, but gestation, that seasons of scarcity are times to sow in expectation of a harvest, and that seasons of abundance are times to reap and to reinvest in preparation for the seasons of sowing. Through gender, the second divine principle is polarity expressed as the creative marriage of masculine and feminine energy. These are not biological identities. They are cosmic currents that operate in both the macrocosmic and microscopic worlds, both within us and outside us. These energies harmonize structure and flow, assertion and surrender, direction and receptivity. Without masculine clarity, empathy becomes enabling. Without feminine compassion, truth becomes judgment. The charismatic self integrates both. The great teachers, lovers, and leaders embody both masculine and feminine energies simultaneously. They have strong spines but soft hearts. They command without domination. They yield without collapse. When your masculine and feminine energies reconcile, your presence becomes whole, and your wholeness magnetizes others. Causation, the third principle, is the law of hierarchy between planes, the bridge between the invisible world of causes and the visible world of effects. Through mastering polarity, we move swiftly and effortlessly between these two worlds, observing effects with insight and directing causes with intention. The masses remain trapped on the plane of effects, reacting to moods and trends, to likes and follows. They think themselves awake but are hypnotized by consequence. The master ascends to the plane of causes, shaping conditions through coherent consciousness. Speech, intention, and energy are causal instruments to such a person. They master these by submitting themselves to the principles of the higher plane. To rise above the plane of effects is not to escape it, but to direct your own polarizing energies instead of being drowned in them. This is what the Kybalion means when it says, But the masters rising to the plane above dominate their moods, characters, qualities, and powers, as well as the environment surrounding them, and become movers instead of pawns. Correspondence, the fourth principle, mirrors polarity in the relationship between our inner and outer worlds, between above and below, and between the macrocosmic and microscopic worlds. Correspondence is the principle by which our outer life reflects our inner architecture. Neglect your inner world, and your outer world collapses. Neglect your outer, and your inner stagnates. Mismanage either, and you fluctuate, often subconsciously, between states of arousal, anger, elation, hyperfocus, and inertia, sadness, boredom, burnout. The charismatic self unites these internal and external states through the principle of polarity, with the heart as the transmitter and the world the receiver. External power without internal purpose creates polarized swings between productivity and burnout. Inner purpose without external power creates polarized swings between elation and depression. Balanced harmony between the inner and outer worlds through the principle of polarity is mastery. Polarity is the master key that integrates these principles and prevents distortion. It aligns you with them to move fluidly, hold tension without fear, and see contrast not as conflict, but as creation in motion. Every institution, religious, political, academic, corporate, runs at the desecration of this principle. The dark occultists who built the matrix depend on your inability to align and to flow with it. They prop up false polarities to extract the energy generated by our constant flitting between the poles of security and fear, excitement and boredom, validation and rejection, and between futility and purpose. This is how modern humans become addicted to the swings between certainty and novelty, comfort and variety, isolation and connection. This addiction is the source of all our fears, frustrations, and our impulse to control outcomes or to pursue one of our needs at the expense of the other. We pursue security at the expense of adventure, adventure at the expense of stability, independence at the expense of connection, codependence at the expense of sovereignty, influence at the expense of integrity, dogma at the expense of enlightenment, and perfectionism at the expense of inner peace. But creation itself is born from the balanced and rhythmic movement between contrasts. Only in this dance between polarities can energy flow, and only in the marriage of differences can we see anything new arise. The world has forgotten how to navigate or even understand this divine principle. This disconnect has torn open a wound in our minds, hearts, and spirits, which the dark occult architects of the matrix use as the control panel for using our deepest fears and desires to lure us about like puppets on strings. The machinery of modern politics and media thrives on manufactured opposition, creating belief systems that pit the most passionate citizens against one another. This creates the space for the dark occultists to dominate while billions are distracted and divided. They create the illusion of choice, left or right, liberal or conservative, patriot or revolutionary. Each party represents one of two doors leading to the same slaughterhouse. The names change, but the mechanism of manufactured polarity remains. Two poles are magnetized through heated rhetoric and policy wars, pitting the public against one another while the powerful harvest the emotional and physical energy of this ongoing conflict. This is the infamous Hegelian dialectic, the taker's engineer crisis, curate conflict, and use propaganda to the solution to both sides. The COVID pandemic of 2020 was the perfect example of this, which persuaded those polarized on both sides of the political spectrum to embrace the mechanisms of control in the name of safety. The masses mistake their reactions to this theater as participation in democracy. They are herded by digital algorithms that predict emotion and serve up content that creates a race to the bottom of the brain stem, plunging each individual into the melting pot of our collective shadow energy. This is a mass black magic ritual that harnesses human energy just as a solo dark occultist uses the blood and semen of animals to cast their spells. Every televised outrage, every viral scandal, every moral panic is polarity harvested for profit, power, and domination. Citizens fuel this current when they oppose and attack each other, but both sides are feeding the same devils. This is how the modern world remains in distraction and bondage. They embrace outrage as the new opiate. The dopamine drip of indignation enslaves them to the swing of the pendulum between right and left. Meanwhile, the builders of the matrix stand calmly at the fulcrum, watching as both political parties burn incense to illusion like prayers being offered up to false gods. This is the illusion of persuasion, where both sides, in their attempt to pressure and persuade one another, submit by default to the will of the powerful few. Politics is just one instrument of this manufactured polarity. In the spiritual world, we find the polarizing forces of orthodox religion and the so-called spiritual, that is, New Age, community. The former embraces the dogmatic position where godliness is strived for by a vain attempt to live by black and white rules and commandments. The latter crowns itself as the alternative to religion, embracing vague and fluid platitudes like, "We are all one, all is life, light, and love, and there are many paths to God." These New Age doctrines became staples of pop culture with the release of the hit 2006 movie The Secret. This movie conned billions of spiritual seekers into embracing the passive pursuit of enlightenment and prosperity under illogical slogans like "thoughts become things," "like attracts like," and slothful claims that we can attract anything we wish for by aligning our thoughts and feelings with it. This doctrine violates the scientific law that attraction comes from the tension between naturally polarized forces. Push the negative or positive poles of two magnets toward one another and they repel. Place the negative against the positive, and they're naturally drawn together. Still, the irresistible appeals to instant gratification and reward without effort entice the spiritual to embrace these doctrines, like the millions of consumers who chase after pills, powders, and potions that promise fast weight loss without submitting to the common sense principles of good fitness and nutrition. On the other end of this ideological spectrum is the belief that results only come from hard work and diligence. Those possessed by this doctrine work themselves into burnout and even sickness and death in the pursuit of material status and success. They alienate themselves from their friends and families, spending more time and energy excelling at a career than building relationships with the people who will remember them when they're gone. The machinery of industrial society feeds off of the physical and mental energy of these individuals, pushing their collective energy of their productivity into the mouths of the powerful few, while the worker bees struggle to survive off of the crumbs that fall from the table of their masters. Those polarized on either side of this equation will remain in mental, physical, and spiritual bondage and feed the spiritual predators of Mammon, Asmodeus, Belphegor, Azazel, Beelzebub, Leviathan, and Lucifer. The truth is, the most fulfilling achievements come only through the balanced rhythm between periods of focus and diligence, balanced with periods of rested reflection and creative visualization. Legacies are built upon this foundation, and yet billions of modern humans remain polarized on either side of this equation, building their lives up with one hand while tearing it down with the other. To break free is to cut the chains that bind us to one side or the other, to rise above the pendulum of false polarity, and to become citizens of what Jesus called the kingdom of heaven. This is the generative dance between our masculine and feminine energies, which are encoded into our nervous system and manifested as the contrasting states of fight, flight, freeze, or fawn, and rest, digest, recharge, and reproduce. The dark occultists create belief systems that tear these two energies into two fragments and polarize billions of people on one side or the other, and then against each other. Those polarized on the feminine side, the New Age movement, unconsciously submit to the will and initiative of those around them who are actively involved in creation. Those polarized on the opposite side lock their nervous systems into constant overdrive and work themselves into burnout, while others harness their mental and physical energy to build their own empires. Finally, we have the false polarity created by our mischaracterizations of our shadow self. This is the most destructive doctrine in human history and the feeding ground for spiritual predation. It's encoded in the popular paradigm that our shadow self is bad or evil and should be denied, repressed, eliminated, or overcome. When we submit to this paradigm, we repress and deny our natural needs, desires, and personality traits, driving them into the shadowland of our subconscious mind. In the West, this is done by inducing guilt, and in Eastern cultures, shame. These emotions coerce billions into the voluntary repression of the selves associated with our shameful or guilty desires. As we grow older, these needs become so repressed that we hardly recognize them as the drives beneath our most perplexing and destructive behaviors. This is the root cause of all self-sabotage. We become driven by greed in hopes of meeting our need for security. We become possessed by lust in hopes of meeting our need for excitement and adventure. We become possessed by sloth and convenience in hopes of meeting our need for autonomy. We choose codependent relationships in hopes of meeting our need to love and be loved. We create facades in hopes of meeting our need for validation, influence, and approval. We submit to rigid and illogical beliefs in hopes of meeting our need for knowledge. We become possessed by pride in hopes of meeting our needs for purpose, significance, transcendence. This is the root of all our impulsive and mysterious behaviors that direct our lives from the depths of our subconscious, while our rational minds construct stories that rationalize or deny such behaviors. This cycle only breaks when, as Carl Jung wrote, we become conscious of the needs driving these behaviors and of the shadow self associated with them. When this happens, we discover that just as dark and light, cold and heat and movement and stillness are varying degrees of the same energy, so our shadow selves are on the same spectrum as our higher selves. This is what it means to awaken your shadow. It's not about embracing and accepting our darkness without question. It's about bringing the dark parts of ourselves into the light of consciousness, where they can be transfigured through the principle of polarity into their corresponding higher selves. This is shadow work, and to commit to it is to confront a hard but liberating choice. Unsubscribe. Free yourself from the dueling, dark occult ideologies that exile your higher selves into shadow. Call your power back and reclaim your sovereignty. Do this not as an act of surrender to the other side, but to God and to the higher commitment to awaken your shadow and transfigure it into the manifestation of your higher self. Rise above both sides and above the material plane into the divine realm of causes. The charismatic self is the author of this process because it is the sole steward of our contract with language. Language is the raw material of the content of consciousness. The charismatic self sheds light on the shadows of false polarity and learns from them instead of shouting at them. It lifts you to the top of the pendulum, where stillness and calm become the tools for directing the polarizing movements between your emotional states. Security and fear, excitement and boredom, validation and rejection, purpose and futility. When you stop pushing and fighting the pendulum, you yourself cease to swing. You become steady, integrated, congruent, and coherent. You begin to live as a cause among the billions who have reduced themselves to living as effects. This is the sacred throne of the charismatic self, from which it holds chaos and order in one gaze, seeing both as instruments of creation. It blesses while others curse. It stands still while empires convulse. It rules as emperor in a world of pawns. It grasps the scepters of polarity in each hand, aligning with and commanding all divine principles and their inner and outer worlds along with them.
End of Chapter 9, Part 1 of Awaken Your Shadow by Seth Chairpack.